To accomplish this need, he needs to action certain questions in a very skillful manner. Now, one aspect of questioning is the technical skill, which we call the art of probing. So, art of probing is one aspect which can be described as the types of questioning procedure a teacher would use to draw his students beyond the regular or the original answer. So, it depends upon the teacher how he takes a particular topic. See, when it comes to languages, if the teacher is teaching maybe an English poem or a drama, so if you draw that poetry or that drama from the local culture of the student, from the local text of the student, from the local social scenario of the student, then it is easy for the student to relate to that. You know, if we kind of teach them a poem which may be describing maybe a urban locality or a countryside in the lands of England, then not every student will be able to relate to it. For a student to be able to relate to it, it should be drawn from their local atmosphere. Why don't we teach them a poem which has representations or references to their everyday life, to their culture, to their festivals, to their day-to-day dealings, to their markets, to their social life, to their schools. So, this is how we need to develop a questioning procedure, or maybe give them a practice of dealing with their day-to-day situation. So, one aspect is questioning. The another important aspect is, like if we have given them a questioning, then what we need is, we need to give them an opportunity of discussing the lesson with the supervisor. Then the supervisor can incorporate these suggestions or comments, and this is called a supervisory conference. So, what happens, we have kind of emphasized on the art of probing, we have kind of had a supervisory conference, and therefore, there is a cycle. Whatever the teacher gains after this conference with the student, he can inculcate all that material for his next class, for the next group of students, and this is how the process gets evolved. So, this teach, conference and reach-teach cycle, which can take place in a considerably smaller period of time, becomes a vital and a valuable aspect of micro-teaching. So, there has to be a supervisory discussion, there has to be a reteach opportunity, and then another supervisory discussion, and this is how we evolve our micro-teaching. So, one of the major recent developments is micro-teaching is, apart from the involvement of the art of probing or the art of questioning the student along with the supervisory conference, there is an increased focus on the teaching and the learning process, which means the element of reinforcement is being involved or calculated. At the same time, we can vary the stimulus and use the illustrations and models. So, these kind of things can be included from time to time. The basic patterns of micro teaching should be that it should be highly focused teaching. So, I can say it is a teaching experience which is highly focused. Then there is a supervisory discussion and a cycle of reteach after that supervisory discussion is being provided. Therefore, a reteach opportunity and then another supervisory discussion. So, what happens is, when these different stages of micro teaching are being observed, we evolve in an highly evolved, or so to say, appropriate pattern of what should be delivered to the student. Now, there are certain basic principles of micro teaching. There are certain principles of micro teaching which evolve in an effective training device, because instead of telling the intern what he should do, what we do is we concentrate on doing it ourselves. through the teach reteach cycle which evolves, and then I would say the basic principles of micro teaching would be what we should be doing rather what the student should do. The basic pattern of micro teaching is it is highly focused teaching experience, it is a supervisory discussion, then there is a reteach opportunity, and then there is another supervisory discussion. So, micro teaching revolves around certain principles to involve and improve the all round development of its teachers and the students or the target society. Number 1, in micro teaching we focus on one skill at a time, which means we are targeting at one skill at a time, we are training our students on that particular skill, and we are delivering or making them practice that skill until they master it. Again, micro teaching therefore becomes a two-way process, because there is the involvement, the teacher is delivering, but at the same time we are paying attention because we are trying that the student should master that particular skill. Therefore, we are targeting that one skill at a time, and once we master, the another skill is targeted. So, therefore, micro teaching targets at one skill at a time. Next is it has a small scale content, which means the contents are limited. And when the contents are limited or limiting the contents, it gives more freedom and more ease to the trainee. You know, we leave lot of things at the target student. They are more comfortable, they are more oriented, they have more freedom, and therefore, they re-evolve or innovate their mechanism when we target a small scale content. So, therefore, it is based on a limited content, and it becomes easier for them to be more focused in conducting their lessons. And as the saying goes, practice makes a man perfect. This is another very basic or very important or very vital principle of micro teaching, because here it requires a lot of practice to master a particular skill. And when you focus on one skill at a time, you master it well. You know, it is easy to master it, and this opportunity to focusing on one skill at a time is provided by the technique of micro teaching. So, this micro teaching gives you an opportunity to practice one skill at a time, and therefore, this practicing boosts up the self confidence and it promotes your skill of teaching. So, then two things happen simultaneously. One, you promote your self confidence, and other, what you do is you promote your teaching skills. So, therefore, practice makes a man perfect. Next important aspect or vital important feature of micro teaching is experimenting. It is a key factor. Experimentations are key factors, and many experiments are conducted in order to test the skill of the teacher and the students. So, what happens is it becomes a cycle. When you conduct, when you teach, when you give, or when you are at the giving end and at the receiving end, and then you take a feedback and again you give. So, this is how you are evolving and you are developing. So, what happens is the supervisor conducts experiments where the length of the lesson, the time of the lesson, and the number of students, so to call the strength of the students in the class, is controlled. Therefore, the aspect of controlled condition, scaled down version in a controlled atmosphere is what micro teaching targets at. And when it targets at all this, it helps you achieve better teaching pedagogy, better teaching presentation. Then what we need is, it gives you an opportunity of instantaneous feedbacks, because here it consists of the teacher and the pupil and the supervisor. Once a session ends, the teacher and the pupil and the supervisor, they all meet for the feedbacks, and this feedback helps in reflecting the it gives you an opportunity to reflect and thereby helping you to rectify your drawbacks. Micro teaching also provides you with an opportunity of self-evaluation. An evaluation of any type gives you or plays an important role in evolving, because it supervisor, while conducting various tests and various other things, it gives you several chances to analyze your mistakes and rectify your mistakes. So, what happens is, thus evaluation, or maybe I can call it self evaluation, it gives you an opportunity to understand your mistakes and to overcome it. Thereby what happens is you achieve an overall improvement. See, it is a continuous effort. Teaching is an art which needs continuous effort because it keeps evolving every time. It is not a static process. It keeps going. It is a continuous effort. So, acquiring knowledge, mastering the skill, it is a slow ongoing process, and this continuous effort makes it easier to attain an overall development and betterment. Now, the question comes, how this knowledge of professional action is developed. How do we develop this knowledge? There are two ways of developing knowledge relating to your professional action, and these two ways are complementary and they are important. So, there is a relation, I mean they complement each other. You just cannot depend on any one aspect, they are complementary to each other. First is, you have to master the received knowledge of the profession in question, which means you have to keep in mind the background of the student plus the practical field in which he is going to work after acquiring this knowledge. So, you have to master the received knowledge of the profession in question. Second important thing is acquiring and reflecting on the experiential knowledge of the professional action itself. Let me elaborate. One, you have acquired or you have mastered a certain knowledge, you have acquired knowledge. Second is reflection, you have to reflect on that knowledge and the practical or the experimental aspect of that knowledge, or in a very layman language I would say the practical field usage of the knowledge. How are you going to use, when it comes to teaching English language or maybe any other language, how are you going to use that particular language in a particular profession? See, English is a language which is like needed or which is very important for any profession, be it a doctor, be it a lawyer, be it an engineer, be it a chartered accountant, anybody. So, and then we have technology or we have terms related to each and every profession. So, how do we help a student attain perfection to meet the needs of that particular profession? So, acquiring and reflecting on the experimental part of a particular knowledge and then its practical usage is very, very important. So, I would rather suggest that micro teaching has three different phases. One, the acquisition of knowledge. How do you acquire knowledge? This is the very first phase of micro teaching, which includes the collection of data, which means the collection of the technical terms, the terminology of a particular field the student has to deal with. The trainee gathers the knowledge and the skill by reading different literature as well as going through certain videos. What happens is, like, if we kind of expose our students to the different plays of English language, English literature, mind you, I want them to do it from their social background. Why don't we let them deal with the plays of Girish Karnad, who deals with the everyday life, or maybe somebody who is a very local writer who writes with a local background, because then what happens is it becomes easier for the student to understand and target. So, first phase is the acquisition of knowledge. Then this phase itself includes the understanding of the required skill in a rational manner, which is a very important component of a classroom. So, you have to understand that data, basically what you have collected, which means the understanding of the required skill in a rational manner. And after the acquisition of the skill, this is you have to acquire the acquisition of the skill you have to go and do research, you have to discuss and plan new strategies. So, this is the working phase of micro teaching. What happens in this phase? For example, you prepare your lessons, you prepare your technical practice skills based on the models that have been presented to you. Why don't you ask your students to maybe go to a field, or say, rather than teaching them names of maybe different plants available in a particular garden, or why don't you ask them to go and explore or maybe spend some time with a local mali or a gardener and try and understand what are the various parts of flowers, what flower is this and what kind of climatic conditions it needs to develop and grow. So, this would be rather the acquisition of the practical aspect or the practice skill. So, these two factors are very, very important in a micro teaching cycle or in a micro teaching phase, and then comes the feedback. So, setting all this includes the length of the lesson, the duration of the class, the skill to be obtained, and definitely the supervisor and the students. The target has to be, there has to be a coordination. And then comes the third phase, which is a transferring phase. This is the last and the major phase, because what happens now, you are actually dealing with the real situation, you are practically facing the world, and now here when you are facing the real situation, it is not a controlled atmosphere. You have been practicing it in a controlled atmosphere, but now you are facing it, which is not at all controlled. So, here you get a platform to learn, to grow, to evolve, and at the same time you develop your own mechanism. So, that is why teaching includes lots of involvement. I like the involvement of different categories or different traits of your personality. You need to know the subject, you need to be skilled, you need to be able to connect to the target audience, which is the student here, and then you need to fulfill the requirement of the target student, which means they have to go and meet the requirement in the practical field. A student wants to be a doctor, so he should understand the various requirements of the medical profession in terms of language. A student wants to be a engineer or maybe a chartered accountant or maybe a pilot, so he needs to understand his requirements in terms of English language, the practical field which he is going to face.